Started. Adrian?
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's class on drawing teeth. I am your instructor, Adrian Hodge, and tonight's class is 90 minutes long, and we will be uh, talking all about drawing teeth. And if you want some other classes on drawing facial features, I've had a number of classes, even recently in this series for Michael's, that you can find in the playlist that Rich is dropping in the chat on YouTube. And if you're searching for those classes later on YouTube, if you found this video on YouTube and are just watching after the class, then you can search my name, Adrian Hodge, and drawing eyes, drawing noses, drawing lips, drawing ears. We've done expressive eyes, and all of those, we focused on the planes of the face, which we definitely will mention today, the contours of the lips. But if you struggle with drawing the lips, because in drawing the teeth, we're going to have to draw the lips today, then you might want to check out one of those classes. And I'll definitely mention how I'm rendering the lips as I go. But if you want more experience with that, then you can check out the classes on drawing lips. And this is the last class for January. We've already had two other classes in January, or I have. So this is the last class for January for me, but I'll be back in February doing a class on drawing hair, which I'm really excited about. It's 4 easy steps for drawing realistic hair. And provided reference photos for that class as well. And then I've got a couple of classes on using the Artist Loft alcohol-based markers. So make sure you sign up for those classes. Those will be exciting. And it's been a while since we've done a hair class. The last one was quite a while back and it was using colored pencils. So I'm using graphite again for that class as well. I'm going to switch to my tabletop view and go over supplies and we'll get started. Don't forget to tag your work with the hashtag Make It With Michaels or Michaels Classes, and you can follow me on Instagram at 80 Hodge. And here's some of my work on my business cards. I'm also on Facebook, Adrian Hodge Fine Art. And Rich also has the link to my link tree that he can drop in the chat for you. And or if you're watching later on YouTube, you can search my name and link tree, and you can find some other links to some other stuff that I have going on, or check out more of my work, etc. Or you can find the link to that playlist on YouTube as well. Okay, so we are using just very simple materials tonight, just a Artist Loft drawing pad like this one, and some Artist Loft graphite pencils. So I've got a few pencils here. I've got a synthetic eraser and a kneaded eraser. Probably be using my kneaded eraser a little bit more here, and that is it. So pretty simple materials. And then I included the reference photos in a document here. So normally I kind of break down the photos a little more whenever we do facial features like this. Like I'll zoom in on the facial features and maybe make it true to life color and then black and white and then invert it and make the darks light and the lights dark. But I decided to include the entire head for these because I wanted us to be able to see the contours of the face around the lips and to be able to measure the value that we're seeing. So the dark and light that we're seeing on some of the rest of the facial features in relationship to the lips and teeth, because this all comes down to value like many other things. So we've got 3 different sets of teeth here that we're drawing. The first one is my adorable son, Jack, when he was about 5 years old, still had all of his baby teeth. He's missing a few now at almost 9 years old. And then this is my studio mate, Lauren Tarbell, and myself back a few years ago as well. But I just thought that our teeth looked really great in this photo. Anyway, so we're going to be drawing Lauren's teeth and then my teeth as well. And again, I wanted us to be able to compare and contrast the light that we're seeing around the rest of the face. And since we're going to be drawing a bit of the corners of the mouth, or the the wrinkles at the side of the mouth as well, I want to focus on that because that's another thing that people often struggle with, the value in those areas. And anyway, I just thought it might be kind of hard to crop. And I'm like, where do I crop? Where does that end? It kind of goes into the whole face. So anyway, those are our reference photos and why I didn't zoom in and crop out, but don't get overwhelmed since it's the entire head. We're still gonna just focus on the teeth here. Okay, so I feel like I've been kind of teasing over the last couple of weeks leading up to this class, saying that there's a trick to drawing teeth, and it all will be revealed tonight. So now I'm going to reveal it. Okay, and you maybe have already noticed what it is. Anybody want to try to say it? Let me see. Who knows what the trick might be that I'm going to talk about? Anybody? It's okay if you don't. Okay. I was just curious if anybody noticed. So it's really what we're not gonna draw. Somebody's saying shadow around, start with the teeth. You don't draw the teeth. Tom, give him a prize. Tell him what he's won, Rich. I don't know. Um, exactly, Tom. We're not going to draw the teeth. We're going to draw everything but the teeth. So we are going to draw the gums. We're going to draw the lips. We're going to really focus on these shadows that are happening on the outer sides of the overall shape that the teeth create. And a little bit of these little negative space moments at the bottom where we can see the darkness of the mouth happening there inside of those little shadows. And then when it comes to the teeth themselves, we're going to leave them alone. We're not going to touch them. I like it. I was just noticing Rich's comments to somebody else. Womp womp. Thanks for playing. That's so cute. Okay. So yeah, like on my son's teeth here, we are going to just find the shape of the teeth and think about the teeth as the absence of anything when we're drawing, and we're just going to draw the value that we're seeing around them. Because what tends to happen, well, first of all, let's talk about what goes wrong when people draw teeth, because I've been teaching art a long time and I've been teaching adults art for 10 years now. And there's two things that people try to disguise in a work of art of a person. It's hands. It's like, can we just put these people's hands in their pockets so I don't have to draw the hands? And with the teeth, it's like, can their mouth just be closed, or can I ignore the teeth, or can I make their mouth closed even though I can see the teeth? I see somebody asking, what pencil am I using? I have not started using a pencil yet. I was just using a pencil to point. I'm using a 10B to point, Christina. I just want to talk about what goes wrong when people are drawing teeth first a little bit. Oftentimes people try to just edit the teeth out, right? And that's tricky because then you're having to draw from your imagination. If I were to try to fix Jack's face and just make his mouth closed, I might make his lips too big. Also, his cheeks would not line up because he's smiling, and our faces completely transform when we smile, and they transform even more when we smile with teeth, right? Okay, so that's one thing that can go wrong. The other thing is people don't pay attention to the value that they're actually seeing, the dark and light shapes that they're actually seeing. And so they try to draw this line in between the teeth. And that line maybe doesn't exist. Like, it is there for sure. I can zoom in, but it really is more like this very light value of the gums. And it looks darker on the Zoom screen I'm noticing right now, but you have a copy of the image yourself. So if you want to look at the image itself, the PDF document that's included with the supply list, I would look at that instead of on the screen right now, because I'm looking at this and then I look up at my computer screen and it looks much darker. Let me look at mine and Lauren's faces and see how that looks on the Zoom. Kind of the same thing. Oh, well, here, yeah, it's a little more apparent on Lauren here. So if we're talking about a value scale from 0 to 10, 0 being absolute white or blank paper, and 10 being an absolute black. So I would say the whitest part of the teeth, and we're just going to make the teeth all white, right? But let's say just all of the teeth is a 0, and then this black shadow at the corner of the mouth, like the inside of the mouth that we can see here, that's a 10, right? So we want to go all the way absolute black on the 10, and we want to leave it blank paper where the teeth are. What would we put this value of the gums? What would we put that value at on the value scale from 0 to 10? Jennifer's saying a 3. I feel like we're on a game show tonight. 2, 3. I would put it at maybe a 2 or maybe even a 1, like between a 1 and a 2. So, I drew it pretty dang light on Lauren there just for the gums. And then the line for the space in between the teeth, and yes, Lauren does have a gap in her teeth, and I did put the gap there. I told her when I used her, I was like, you're like, you know, perfect model for teeth because you have that gap, and it's like we are going to put that line for the gap because that makes it look like Lauren's teeth, right? So, or if you're drawing a kid that's missing teeth, then maybe you do the shadow for the missing teeth there. But even on Jack, we're just going to do more of that little negative space moment, that little triangle of negative space up there. We're not going to do the line that's separating the teeth, even though you maybe do see a little bit of that, because what's going to happen if we draw that line at all? So yeah, I would give D a womp womp, not a 4. If we make it a 4, or if we make it darker than it needs to be, or if we draw a line right there, what ends up happening is the person looks like we get a grill, and that's, if you want it to look that way, or like, with Lauren, we want that gap in there. So if you want that to happen, then by all means. But if you're like not happy with the that hard line in between the teeth and you can't figure out how to make it lighter, just don't draw it. And then every time I teach this in a class, I pull up all these examples of drawings where I draw the teeth this way, and most people did not notice that I was leaving the teeth blank until I pointed out. So yeah. Okay, so that's the trick. So let's get started here. It's all about the light and dark values. So we're going to start with drawing a value scale. And I don't always do this in every class, but I feel like it's worth reviewing because this is such a focus here. I'm going to get a new sketchbook out. Maybe I'll keep that one right there. And I'm going to use a couple of different pencils here. So I've got my 10B. I want you to have at least your darkest B pencil that you have. So maybe that's an 8B or a 6B or a 4B, whatever the darkest pencil that you have is. And then you definitely want an H pencil. So like a 2H or an H. Okay, so let's take that 10B and let's just go ahead and draw a nice long skinny rectangle so we can create a value scale. And if this is the first you're hearing about the letters and numbers on the graphite pencils, then you can check out the class in that playlist on graphite basics. All right. So I don't know why I just wrote 10B. I was trying to just write 10 when I guess I just had the, but actually maybe I will do that because you're going to want a B pencil for the dark side and you're going to want an H pencil for the light side. So I'm going to say 0 and then 10, and then you want H's for the light side and B's for the dark side. All right, so your 0 is your blank paper or your absolute white. And we have reviewed this a lot in all of these classes. Those of you who come weekly probably done this before, but this just is worth repeating for anybody who's brand new tonight. And then on our 10 side, we need an absolute black. So the 10 is the absolute black and the 0 is the absolute white or blank paper. So then we're going to take that, whatever the softest, darkest pencil that you have with the highest number on the B side, and we're going to use the side of it. And we're going to just make some tiny little rotating circles, some nice, smooth, continuous blending using the side of the pencil so we can get it really soft. And we want to keep repeating and layering that graphite until we get no paper showing through. So we get that absolute black to happen. So you can eventually start to put more pressure on the pencil, but you want to start out nice and light. And then we'll continue down our value scale. This value scale does not have to be perfect. We're just starting to get an understanding of how to go from dark to light with our graphite pencils and to just see the difference between an absolute black 10 and that 0 and 1 and 2, because it's very important for the teeth and for those gums to not make them too dark. Well, the teeth, we're not going to draw them at all, right? But especially for the gums and those little spaces and the lips, we want to get that value as accurate as possible. So I kind of gradually shifted my pressure down until I get to more of a mid-tone here in the middle. And then I'll just go back over it to blend it. And again, we don't need a perfect value scale here. I'm still using the 10B, but maybe I'll switch to an 8B here, or you could even switch to, if you're using like a 4B or a 6B for your darkest value, you could switch to a 2B or a regular, just a B pencil, or maybe even an HB for your mid-tone. So just something that's less dark. So the B pencils just get darker and softer as the numbers go higher, and they get lighter and harder for the H pencils. So we're only using our H pencils for these really light values and for our preliminary sketching. So I'll switch to my H pencil for the lightest value here, and then I'm really pulling up on the pressure on my pencil because I want that 1 on the value scale to be just like a baby's breath, like barely there. And then I'll just gradually increase that value so I can get it to be more of that 3 and 4, and then meeting it in the middle at a mid-tone. So don't worry about if your value scale is perfectly, from 0 to 10 here. You just want something represented that goes to absolute black, and then something represented that is more of a mid-tone in between blank paper and black, and then something that is so pale and light that you can barely see anything on the page, because that's what we want for the gums. We want somewhere in between a 1 and a 2 on the value scale for the gums. We want midtones and darker values uh, for the lips, mostly midtones for the lips. And then we're going to create that contrast by going all the way to black on the shadows at the corners of the mouth, or not the corners of the mouth, but you know, the void there in between where it turns into a little cave. It's cavernous. We can't really see the teeth. The teeth are starting to be so far back that we can't see them. And we're just seeing the shadow that's created inside of the mouth when the mouth is open. So we're looking for a 10 in that negative space there between the corners of the mouth and the teeth that are not visible to us right here. We want a 10, or if there's any gaps in the teeth or those little pockets of negative space between the lips and the bottom shape of the teeth, that's where we want the 10. Okay, is in those spaces, and that's going to create depth and contrast and all that good stuff. And then I wanted to talk about these little smile lines that happen as well, because that's another aspect of drawing faces that can be tricky for a lot of people in addition to the teeth. Is like on Jack, if we were to make those too deep, we could age him. We could make him look much older by doing that, because those tend to deepen as we age, right? And or if we make them too dark, sometimes we might feel like we make the person look strange in some way. So again, let's not look at the Zoom screen because it looks much darker on my Zoom screen, but I'm looking at just like, let's look at the actual photo that you should have in front of you and tell me on myself here. Well, we'll look at Lauren's as well, but right here, what would you put this value on that value scale from 0 to 10? What would we put this little crease? And let's not talk about the darkest part of it, but like right here, like most of it. Okay, Kylie's saying a 7. In the darkest part of it, there are a couple moments where I would maybe put it at a 7. But if I do, then it's gonna make that look way more severe than it actually does. And again, I'm talking about in the photo itself. For some reason, Zoom, this is like, it's shooting me in the foot so much right now. Don't look at your computer screen. Look at the photograph itself. Aaron's saying a 5 or a 6. I still think if we make it that dark, it's going to emphasize those lines. So maybe even if you read it as a 5 or a 6, I would still put it at somewhere around a 2, 3, or a 4. Because the lighter we make that, the less we're going to emphasize that. And it's still going to be visible as a crease in the face. But if you make it super dark, it's just going to detract away from the rest of the face. And I always like to reference a funny line in the movie Napoleon Dynamite when I talk about this. As he takes the drawing to the girl that he wants to ask to the dance, and he says, "It took me like 4 hours to get the shading on your upper lip." And she looks horrified. And my joke whenever I quote that in class is like, maybe just don't draw the shadow on the upper lip. You know, there there are things we can just edit for the sake of art, right? Because, or like this shadow underneath Lauren's nose, if I were to make that too dark, that's going to be really distracting, right? So always, for things that are like that you're worried, are, think of it as the same way as the lines in between the teeth. Yes, there is a tiny little visible line there, but if we draw the line, it's going to draw all this attention to the line, right? But we could just not draw the line, and our eyes will complete the line and will read it as a line, even though the line is not there, right? So same thing with the smile lines and the creases there. We could draw them super dark. We could emphasize them. We could make them darker than they are because they're really not as dark as they look on the Zoom screen. In the photograph, they're not. Oh my God, sorry. Anyway, we're going to draw them lighter than they really are, folks. If you want to draw them darker, you go right ahead. I'm not the boss of you, but I feel like if we draw them a little lighter, then we can emphasize things like dimples, or we can emphasize what we want in a work of art. We don't have to always draw things in a way that, you know, we can manipulate what a viewer looks at when they look at the work of art. Okay, let's move on to actually drawing some teeth here, but I just want to make sure we're noticing and we're looking at these values because looking is so much of the puzzle piece here. Okay, let's talk quickly about contours. Even though I said I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time talking about drawing the lips, I feel like I just have to do it a little bit. So to get started, we're going to look at the two-dimensional shapes that turn into three-dimensional shapes here. And if I go a little fast for you, or you're like, whoa, slow down, that's too much, I don't know enough about drawing lips, then that's why I have that other class on drawing lips that you can check out. So where I really slow down and, walk through all of this. I'm just going to do it, and I'm using let me use my darker pencil here. I'm going to use my 8B so that my lines show up on the screen. You can use your H pencils so that they're easier to erase. You don't always want to use the same pencil that I'm using, because with graphite, I have to draw a little darker to make it show up on these Zoom classes. So with Jack's lips here, I am looking at this meaty part on the top lip, and I'm going to draw two long ovals that are right next to each other. Okay. And then I am going to look at the kind of heart shape that the upper lip creates on top of that, kind of like a little top of a heart shape here. And I'm going to get my iPad out of the way because it's going to mess with the light. I just realized I don't have my ring light tonight. I left it at home. It didn't even occur to me until this moment that I'm missing my ring light, but sometimes that kind of messes me up with these graphite classes too. So it's probably better. Okay, and then we're going to ignore the teeth for now, and we're going to do the same thing on the bottom lip. We're going to draw these two big meaty moments that happen on the bottom lip with some big ovals that stack right next to each other. And then I'm just noticing the outer shape of the bottom lip. Okay, so we want to get three-dimensional forms here. We're not looking for perfection. This is just a little practice sketch to get an understanding of the three dimensions that are happening. Okay, and then I'm going to go a little wider for that part in the middle of the lips. So draw that line a little wider, and I'm going to kind of have that line curve down a little bit here. All right. And then I just want to talk about the contours. So the contours are the elevational lines that describe the three dimensions of the form. And we can see that they're going to curve on these ovals. They're going to curve in different directions. And this is where I said, if you're just like super puzzled and don't know what I'm talking about, you can check out the drawing lips class where I slow down a lot more with all this. But there's an equator line here in the middle. And then the curve on the vertical axis is going to radiate out in opposite directions on either side of that equator line. And you can see this when you look at the lips themselves. And then on the horizontal axis, they're going to follow that same curve as the top lip. Okay. And then same thing on the bottom lip, and we're not looking for perfection here. We're just trying to understand the three-dimensional curve that is happening. there's going to be a similar radiation happening here. So, and the creases in the lips, the little wrinkles and creases, sometimes you can notice how those follow those same shapes. You can actually see the creases on the lips. So we're just noticing that and noticing the three-dimensional curve here. Just a little practice sketch to look at the contour lines. I'm not going to map it out like this for all of the lips. I just want to make sure that I've touched on this a little bit so that you can hopefully get more of a three-dimensional shape. So as we start to add the value to the lips, we're going to make sure that our value is following these contours. So I'm going to notice what the value is, and I'm going to try to make my value follow the same curve. So I'm going to like send my value along the curved lines that we drew for the contours here. Okay, that's just my little practice tutorial about the contours of the lips. Now I want us to get started drawing some teeth. So I'm gonna flip to another blank page. And we'll start with Jack's teeth. We should have enough time to draw all three sets of teeth here and the lips. Okay, so I'm going to start with my H pencil, and you're maybe not going to be able to see my lines as I get started here. But I promise as I darken up my lines, you will see what I'm doing. So just please be patient with me. Drawing lightly and then moving up to darker values is the key to what we're doing here tonight with the teeth. So, just got to be patient with me because that's every time I do a graphite class on Zoom, it's such a struggle because I watch the playbacks and I see how it looks like nothing. It looks like blank paper until I start to add darker lines. And I did the practice sketch nice and dark so you could see how I'm starting. And if you need to start with those two-dimensional shapes with the ovals first, then by all means do that. But I'm just gonna kind of draw the outer shape of the lips to get started here. And since it's going to be hard to see anyway, I might as well put my reference photo right there. Okay, so I'm just drawing the outer shape, and I'm trying to get a little more accurate to what I'm seeing on Jack's lips. I've got that downturned line that leads into the bottom lip. And then I've got that space for the teeth. I'm drawing nice and light, letting my pencil lines just sit on the surface of the paper so that they're easy to erase. And I'm using a 2H pencil, keeping everything nice and light. And I'm looking to see if I've got the right amount of symmetry and balance. Most people's facial features are not symmetrical. So trying to force symmetry where there isn't symmetry will delete the likeness from that person's face. The main thing here is to make sure that the space in between the lips closely matches the amount of space in the photograph. So, and children's lips are much bigger, take up a lot of space on their faces compared to adult lips. Lips and eyes are just like supersized on a child's face. And that's why in the beauty industry, youth tends to equal beauty, right? So plastic surgery, all that stuff, it's usually we're trying to make the lips look bigger, the eyes look bigger, etc. Okay, so we want to notice how big those lips actually are compared to the teeth. And then I'm noticing this shadow that's kind of falling across the bottom lip right here. And making sure that I get that empty shape for that shadow in there. And then I also like to say lips are like butter melting on a piece of toast. They just kind of melt into the skin of the face, and oftentimes the value on the lips matches the value on a lot of people's faces. So it's hard sometimes to have a hard line, or to, if you force a hard line on the edge of the lips, it's more drawing from your imagination than drawing from reality. So we really want that line to be soft, and because the skin of the lips does just really melt into the skin of the face, and it tapers off really gradually there. So I'm just trying to match that tapered off shape there, and I don't want to draw it too dark, because if I draw it too dark, it's not going to match the value in the photograph. The only thing we actually want to be super dark is that shadow right there, right? We want the lips to be a pretty light value. And they may just look darker. That my drawing actually does look darker on the Zoom screen. It's really annoying how that is the case tonight. I'm trying to tell y'all to make it light, but then I look at the Zoom and it's like it just looks so much darker right there than it is in the photograph or in my drawing. Anyway, okay, so I am seeing probably a 2 or a 3, maybe a 4. No, I would say it's still around a 3 for the darkest shadow on the top lip. And we've already decided we're gonna keep those gums at like a 1 or a 2, but then there is a little bit of a darker line at the very bottom, like a little cast shadow from the bottom lip. So I am going to go a little darker on just that little line of separation right there. But for most of the lips, I'm going to keep it pretty light. And same thing with the bottom lip. I'm putting it at like a 2 or a 1, really a 1 for a lot of it. And then I'm just going to get dark here in the corners of the mouth and the gums. But first, let's draw the shape of those gums. Maybe let me go back to my other drawing real quick for just a second so I can draw it dark. Okay, this isn't accurate proportionally, but I just want to draw it nice and dark where everybody can see the shapes that I'm drawing here. Okay, so first I'm going to try to balance it and get the corners of the mouth. Like if I start with the middle of the teeth, I might have to shift this a little bit here. So first I want to make sure that that negative space in the corners of the mouth are in the right spot. And there is that one tooth that I can kind of barely see it right there in the photograph. We're just going to pretend we can't see it and make it all black right there. Okay. And then I'm going to go over and I'm going to lightly sketch that little corner that I'm seeing. And then I got another little triangle corner, and it's sort of rounded for the round bottom here. And again, if you can't really see it, just wait until I add the shadow. You'll be able to see it more. And then the bottom of his teeth are flat. So that's where that like little cast shadow is coming from right there. But then we've got that little corner in the center. So we really just want to make sure that center lines up right here. I think, yeah, someone I saw this on Instagram a while back that Tom Cruise looks like he has 3 front teeth, or like he has like one of his front teeth is like in the center of his mouth, like the part is not. And I never noticed that until somebody pointed it out on some Instagram post. And then now it's like, you can't unsee it. But most people's 2 front teeth line up right there with the center of the lips, that equator line on that vertical axis. Okay, and then this is another thing that kind of threw me off when I was drawing mine and Lauren's teeth too. I kept felt like I had to readjust the negative space so many times because I was wanting to add an extra tooth in there, and like I just made that tooth way wider than it actually is on Jack. But that's the kind of, I mean, we're not worried about proportions right here. But I just wanted y'all to see the shapes that I'm drawing. So hopefully I'll get that more accurate in my other drawing on the next page. And then again, I'm just drawing this darker right now so you can see it. Now I'm looking for that shape of the gums. Okay, so those are the shapes that I'm about to draw nice and light with my H pencil in my other drawing. All right. I think I'm gonna tear out that scratch paper in case I need to go back to it. Always good idea to have a piece of scratch paper off to the side so you can test things out. Or think about every drawing that you do as a test piece of paper and as practice. Don't take it all so seriously. Like, we can always start again. Not the end of the world if it's not perfect. Okay, so I'm drawing that negative space first. And remember, a lot of this is the shadow. So it's not quite as big as it seems so far. And that can throw a lot of people off too, because they have a hard time imagining what it's going to look like with the value inside of it. So don't let your critical voice in your head get in the way telling you that that's wrong. Let's just draw it first the way we think it is. And then we'll add the value. And if it looks wrong, we can always do it again. Okay, so I got the space for the, well, just let me do the bottom space first again. Because yeah, I might have made the lips a little too wide. And if it seems like you did that, you'll know because it'll feel like you need to squeeze an extra tooth in there. Or like you're making the teeth too wide. And that's one of those things that it's better to admit to yourself that, hey, I need to draw this again at this stage than to just plow ahead and add extra teeth, right? And then it's not going to look like that person if you're giving them extra teeth they don't have. All right, so I'm just drawing those shapes again, nice and light. Hopefully you guys can see this on the screen. I can see it right now pretty okay. Okay, I'm just cleaning up some of those lines, making the teeth line up a little more. Isn't it so weird that somewhere in my house is a pile of children's teeth? Every parent, I was talking to a parent recently. Somebody came through my studio on an open studio event and we were just making chit chat and she was saying how she carried crystals in her purse and I was like, "Oh yeah, I got some crystals in my purse." We were talking about what kind of crystals we had and she said at one point she was carrying some of her kids' teeth around in her purse, like for good luck or something. And then she thought she was like looking for something at the bottom of her purse one time and pulled out a child's tooth and was like, "Okay, this has to stop." This is not right. I thought that was so funny. Like, at what point do we stop saving the teeth? How many of my kids' teeth do I need to have hidden in the closet, you know? Because if they found them, they would know I'm the tooth fairy. Sorry for anybody who still believes in the tooth fairy in the chat tonight. Okay. Sorry, I'm looking at Rich's reaction. Okay, yes, I'm about to make it darker. It's about to happen, Danica. I want you to draw lightly too, okay? Because this is all about this light value. All right, so now I'm gonna start in, actually, let's start with the darkest value. So those of us who, that way it'll show up a lot faster on the Zoom here. So I'm gonna start with my B pencil. Also, it's kind of nice to have if you're left-handed like me, maybe use a spare piece of paper to rest your hand on since we're starting with the darker values. And that way you don't smudge the rest of your paper with your value here. Okay, so I'm gonna start with those really dark corners. And we're gonna maybe exaggerate a little bit here. And we're gonna keep it nice and soft. As long as you keep your pencil soft, let it sit on the surface of the paper, it is still pretty easy to erase. As soon as you press down on your pencil and embed it into the surface of the paper, then it's harder to erase. So I'm gonna keep it nice and soft and gradual. And hopefully by adding this darker value, it'll make it easier on the Zoom to see those other lighter lines that I've drawn. And if not, just hang tight. I'm gonna add the value all the way around. So it's just a small little portion here that we're gonna take all the way dark. And then I'm gonna switch to a lighter pencil. There we go. Pull out some extra pencils here so I have more variety.
Adrian Chanel said it's okay. She's 11 and her parents already told her who the tooth fairy is.
Okay. My 11-year-old knows now too, Chanel. Uh, but I still give her the tooth fairy money so that her brother doesn't find out yet. She loves it. Okay, so I'm adding that little shadow at the bottom, those little corners. I even had a conversation with my daughter recently where I was like, I just still am a believer. I just want to be a true believer. I do believe. And she was like, even though you've been the one putting the stuff there all these years? And I'm like, yes, I still believe in magic. All right, so we're getting those dark little rounded triangular corner spaces in there, and now it's starting to, the optical illusion is starting to happen. And I used a 4B for that, by the way. Now I want to use a 2B for these. This lightest value on the lips. Got a whole bin full of pencils here. I'm just trying to make sure I use an artist loft. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna stick to the 4B and just go nice and light. I thought I had a 2B, but it turned out it was a 12B. It's like, that is too dark.
Just a few technical difficulties, folks. Adrian's laptop was giving her a bit of problems earlier, so let's just hold for just a moment to see what's happening.
So sorry, folks.
There we go. We missed you.
Thank you. I'm so sorry. I think my internet just failed me a little bit here. But glad thankful for hotspots. Okay, so I was just saying how, it's your personal preference about how you like to draw. So I never want to impose my preferences on people. If you prefer to start out light, then by all means, start out with the lighter values and work your way up to dark. But there's two reasons why I'm starting with dark. One, so that you can see my lines and we don't have to wait so long to see the drawing develop on the Zoom. And then two, a lot of people do seem to have an easier time starting out dark and then letting up on their pressure. Okay. And then now as I add this value, remember we want to follow these contours. So you might even kind of make your pencil go in the direction of those contours as you're adding the value and then just really softly blend it out. I'm keeping it really soft and light here, even though I've got a 4B pencil. You could be doing this with a 2B or a B. And yeah, for the sake of drama, we are making it a little darker on the lips than maybe it is in that photograph. But it does get lighter in some areas, so it's not quite the same value all the way around. So there's definitely a few moments, and maybe you could even use your kneaded eraser to pull some of it out. As long as you're keeping it nice and soft, it should just come right off with your eraser. And then remember, we want it a little darker here at the edge of the top lip, the bottom of the top lip. Okay. And then with the bottom lip, there's all this reflective light happening here. So I'm going to draw in the shape of the light, and I'm just going to leave that blank paper. And you could have started with the gums if you wanted. I just wanted to hurry up and get some of this, the darker value on there. And the lips are darker than the gums. But it's still pretty light on this bottom lip, except for a few moments where it's a little darker, like over here on the side. And I repositioned my arm so that my pencil is coming at it from the top of the page, because I find it's easier if I switch directions the way I'm holding the pencil to keep on the side of the pencil. So I'm not using the front of my pencil to draw. And I talk all about that in my class on graphite basics. That's in that playlist on YouTube, or you can search my name and the words graphite basics. Maybe graphite for beginners. I can't recall the exact title of the class, but it's there in that playlist and there on YouTube and on the Michaels website under fine art. They have all of the class listings as well. All right, and then now we want that light value on the gums. So I'm using my 2H. Still using the side of the pencil. You can go back with maybe that 8B and kind of blend out these transitional moments. Like we wanted it a little darker here on the bottom lip. Transition that corner of the mouth. And then maybe even make it, oh yeah, we do want a little bit of a darker shadow right here under that tooth and in the center there. Or if you want to exaggerate the value on the lips for the sake of drama. All right, and then we've got that little shadow on the underneath, like the little cleft under the bottom lip. And then I'm not really doing those smile lines on Jack as much here, but we're going to do them on the drawing of my teeth and of Lauren's. But you could put a little bit of like this shadow over here if you wanted to play around with that. Or maybe this shadow on the side of the mouth. But again, if you go too dark with some of those things, it can really start to distract and detract from the part of the drawing that you want the focus to be on. All right, let's move on to Lauren's teeth, and I'm not gonna go as in depth with these next two. I'm gonna just get started and just draw them. Okay. So next up we'll do Lauren. And I'm going to start out with that H pencil again. So you're not going to be able to see my lines right away. So just bear with me. So we've got a whole different shape to Lauren's mouth and lips than Jack's here. But again, the class is called Drawing Teeth. So let's manage our expectations about what we're hoping to get out of the class. I've got a separate class on drawing lips. So if you're struggling with capturing likeness, or you're struggling with the contours of the lips, or all of those things, there are separate classes for that you can check out. And I knew this was going to be a bit of a struggle with this class for folks who need a little more help with drawing the lips, but I really just want the focus to be on the value of the teeth and how to draw convincing, realistic teeth. So I'm going to keep my focus on that and know that I've got all those resources on YouTube if you're struggling with any other aspect of this drawing. Okay, and also I know that we can probably not see my lines right now. I'm very aware after teaching these classes on Zoom for 3.5 years. In fact, it always gives me a little bit of anxiety. And when I know I'm teaching a class using pens or paint or anything else that shows up more on the screen, I relax so much more into the teaching experience because I don't know what else to do about it.
Adrian, a few folks are wondering if you could display the reference photo next to what you're working on and perhaps use your pencil to direct them where you're actually working in relation to the reference photo. Is that possible?
I can, but that is when I have my iPad on the screen, I feel like it washes out the light of the drawing even more. And then you're not going to be able to see my lines. See like how it just overexposed it when I did that. But then as soon as I take the iPad away, it does that. Yeah. And
Yep.
I used to use printout all the time, but then because that, I didn't have the issue with the printouts, but then with the printouts, I can't zoom in. And it's so nice being able to zoom in. So that's why you've always got a copy of the photo. And I'm happy to maybe make it side by side with
Or maybe
the,
just pop it on, Adrian, whenever you're moving to a different part of the mouth to let them know where you're heading.
okay, I can try that. Or I could just point to the shapes that I'm
Yeah.
looking at. How about that? Okay, so first I just drew or here. I mean, it'll take up a little more time and we might not get to the third set of lips, but and I realized I'm going out of order. I'm doing Lauren's next, but let me do it this way. Because that's why I started by doing this with Jack's lips. I drew it nice and dark for us. So let me do the same thing with Lauren. Okay, so I'm starting with kind of a big Joker smile shape. So I'm starting with like a half crescent shape, and that is the line at the top of the top lip. Okay, so that's what I just drew, is the line at the top of the top lip. Then I drew the line at the bottom of the top lip. And again, it's kind of like a big emoji smile here. I'm just looking at the overall big shapes. So I'm not worried about perfection or proportions or anything here yet. And then I drew the space for the teeth in between the top lip and the bottom lip. And so this line is actually the top of the bottom lip. And then I'm noticing the difference between, where the skin of the lips kind of melts into the skin of the face. So the lips actually start like right here. Okay, so like right here, like a little hammock shape coming off of it. But again, if drawing the lips is really a huge challenge for you, I really recommend checking out the class on drawing lips, because I think copying line for line what I'm doing is not going to be as helpful as understanding why I'm using those lines and the contours of it. And I really break it down a lot more in that class. And there's maybe just not an, and also I just don't want to repeat myself since this class is about drawing teeth, but okay, so we've got that shape, which is going to look a little wacky and weird so far, but we're just going to go with it. And then we're looking at the negative space at the corners of the mouth. And this is where a lot may need to be adjusted. Um, So you might need to redraw that a couple of times if it doesn't line up. And so this is this photograph of Lauren. She's the one that's got the little gap in between her teeth. Oh my gosh, it keeps rotating. So looking at that gap and noticing where the gap occurs in relationship to the top lip. And this is where faces are not symmetrical and there's not perfect symmetry happening here. So you may have to draw it a few times, and the way that I just drew it might not be correct either, but it's just a little practice drawing, so that's okay. And just want to see where that gap would line up on the lips and where those spaces in between the teeth are, because that's all that we're drawing. See, this is why drawing this stuff dark with a dark pencil is not a good idea, because it's hard to expect yourself to be perfect the first time. So drawing light with an H pencil is always a good idea, but then y'all gotta wait for me to find the shapes I'm looking for, and can't have it all the ways at once. We can have it all, but just not all at the same time, right? Just gotta be patient with this process. Okay, so I'm just going to draw it nice and dark. I think that looks pretty good. And then in a second, I'm going to draw it again nice and light, because I don't necessarily want all these lines to be this dark, because we're looking for soft value, right? But I'm going to draw it dark just so y'all can see it. I do not advise that you draw your lines this dark, because we want it to be nice and light value. We can't erase this if we draw this dark. Okay, so those are the shapes that we're looking for. And then on the top, on the gums, we're looking for these shapes, but again, I'm gonna have to draw this again because I don't want these to be this dark. Anybody has any ideas about how I can make this Zoom experience better with drawing with graphite? I'm so open to it. Okay, so those are the shapes we're looking for, but really nice and light so that we can gradually increase our value. All right, I'm gonna draw that again, super light. How about I'll keep that over here to the side. But maybe you can start to see why I don't want you to go so dark with your lines, because see how that's looking a little creepy? That looks creepy, y'all. And that's what happens when we make the value too dark on the teeth. Because do we see the difference? Maybe that's good that I did it that way. Okay. Let me start. I'm going to draw it the way I like to this time. How are we doing on time? I think we maybe are not going to get to that last set of lips, but I'll do my best. I'm glad I'm doing Lauren's next because she's got that gap in her teeth. And I think that is characteristic of a lot of people that we want to capture a certain likeness about them. And there can be this inclination to want to edit things about people when we're drawing them, to edit out those characteristics that are so them. And if we do, we take away their likeness. So if someone is maybe missing a tooth or has, you know, an interesting shape to their teeth, the trick is keeping this value really nice and light and gradual and suggesting it through implied lines. We're implying, that's what we're doing here. We're implying the things, and the viewer does the work. Because when we draw too much that we don't need to draw, like right here, I didn't need to make those lines that dark, except for that so you could see them, right? So that you could be able to draw it a little better yourself. But just in for the sake of a drawing, for drawing teeth, if I did that, my drawing is going to suffer. And I've talked about this a lot over the years in these Michael's classes and in my in-person classes. And I use this one analogy. The first time I said it in one of these Michael's classes was probably 3 years ago when drawing trees. And if you want to look up the class on drawing trees, you'll hear me say this same thing in that class. And that's, I'm going to use an analogy of movies and TV shows. Okay, so you know how when you're watching a movie like Interstellar is the example that I like to use, because Christopher Nolan treats his audience as if they are smart enough to figure out what's going on in that film without having it all spelled out to them. You know, they're not at the beginning of the movie, you maybe don't realize how certain characters are related to each other or what their pasts are, but as the movie unfolds, you start to piece it together and you figure it out, because maybe you have to watch it a few times, but but eventually you can figure out what the relationships are, at least, of the people. Let's not talk about the quantum physics in that movie. But then you watch a show like a soap opera, or the example I like to use is This Is Us. And I'm not putting down This Is Us. I love that show. I cried so much throughout that entire show and loved it all the way through. Watched it religiously every week for years. But that show does not treat their audience as if they're smart enough to figure out what's going on. You could come in on season 4 and be like, how, what? Oh, that's that they're all triplets? What? You know, like they'll fill you in. They'll let you know, like they do flashbacks and they just spell it out for the viewer. You know, in a conversation, they will recap everything that's going on. Anyway, my point being, when it comes to making art, making realistic art, we can treat our viewers like they are smart enough to figure out what they're looking at because the human brain is really good at finding patterns, and we're even more skilled at, our eyes are really good at finding what is familiar to us. We want to see what's familiar. So if we suggest in our drawing, hey, that you're looking at teeth, a viewer is going to be like, oh yeah, I see teeth. We don't need to spell it out. We can just suggest it. Anyway, that's my little spiel about drawing nice and light and suggesting rather than spelling it out. Just keep in mind that the person looking at your drawing is pretty smart and they're going to be able to figure out what they're looking at. Okay, so I got those shapes down. Let me start to make things darker so we can see them better. So now I'm gonna start to put those 10 values in between. And I keep kind of reworking this moment here in between the teeth because there's a little bit of a space in between the bottom of the teeth and the lips, but I drew it a little too big. Also, it's interesting how some people have a flat line at the bottom of their teeth, and then other people's teeth are more rounded, like Lauren and I are good examples. She's got the straight shape to the bottom of her two front teeth, and mine are a little more rounded at the bottom. So yeah, the point that I was starting to make about suggesting things for when somebody's got some, you know, like a kid who's missing several of their baby teeth and maybe they're coming in at different angles and stuff, there would be a way to draw that. And I have drawn that. And it is tricky. It's tricky to not make teeth that are in some state of disarray like that, like when a child is missing several baby teeth. Um, but again, if you just focus on the negative space and the shadows in between the teeth and just comfort yourself with the knowledge that you don't have to draw the teeth themselves, it'll work itself out. And Rich and I were actually talking before the class even started about how getting in our heads too much about things whenever we're drawing can really throw us off so much. So one thing that you can do to get out of your head, this is all straight out of the book, Drawing on the Right Side of the Brain by Betty Edwards. You can turn your photograph upside down and turn your drawing upside down. You can do some blind contours to warm up. We do a lot of that in these classes. Maybe we could have started with that tonight, and that might have been helpful. All right, I'm gonna switch back to an H pencil for these light values on the gums. And yeah, just keeping it really soft and light here. Because the viewer is gonna do all the work.
We had a question, excuse me. We had a question a bit ago. Someone had asked, are there any differences in drawing someone who is perhaps speaking, talking, something like that, other than just a front-on smile when you're working with teeth? Do you approach it differently or similarly?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, that is similar to the expressive eyes class that I did this summer where we drew eyes and then we did expressive eyes. Uh, it's really just noticing the different shapes that are happening. So the shape of the mouth is going to be different mid conversation versus smiling, like posed for a camera. So just noticing the particular shapes of the shadows and the shapes of the light and the contours and that particular facial expression. I'm actually teaching an in-person class right now on portrait drawing with live models in Austin, Texas, at Laguna Gloria, and on Thursday mornings. Anyway, y'all don't need to know all the details of my class, but it's in the morning. And in that class, we were just remarking last week how one of the students seemed to capture more emotion in their drawing of the model than other people did, and there were even some drawings that were technically uh maybe more impressive than the student who captured emotion, but everybody was really taken by that and they were like, how do you do that? How do you capture emotion? And I said, that person who was doing it, she's been drawing for many years and just practice, I think. I think just the more you practice, or maybe it's an openness, because I know when I felt like I started to capture emotion in portraits, it was definitely after years of drawing portraits and just a certain openness, like I'd cracked myself open a little bit. I don't know how else to explain it, but that's that whole thing about flow in creative work, is that you gotta just stay open, stay out of your head. That's my advice. Try to get out of your head. If only I could follow that advice a little better sometimes myself, though. So much easier said than done. All right, it is 7:20. I don't think we are going to get to that last set of lips, but that is okay. That is how it goes sometimes. But we definitely accomplished what we came here to do, which was learn how to draw teeth. And hopefully drawing the lips didn't give us too much trouble. I tried to do as much of a tutorial as I could squeeze in there about it. So I'm just keeping that value nice and soft on the lips, noticing where there are highlights. I'm looking back at this one just to see how I handled that the last time, in those moments, those transitional moments between the dark and midtones on the lips there. And yeah, the one thing I was going to say about the drawing of my teeth was, I mean, Lauren's face is a little bit at a 3/4 angle, but my face is much more at a 3/4 view, meaning you can see more of one side of my mouth than the other. Lauren's kind of facing the camera a little bit more than I am. So that's why I wanted to include the entire photos and not crop it in some way. But just that equator line at the vertical center is not going to be right at the center. on the photograph of my lips. If you were to work on that one, that's just the one little thing I wanted to point out, is how we can see more of the my left, your right, and less of my right, our left, looking at it, right? So the center is a little bit more off to the left there. Okay, but I do want to talk about the smile lines on Lauren before we wrap up here. So let me get the value finished out. Oh, she does have such a genuine smile. I'm gonna tell her you said that. She has such a beautiful soul. I even walked into the studio today and I could tell she had been here because it smelled amazing. I was like, oh, Lauren was definitely here today. And she was either wearing some lovely smelling things or burning a candle or something, probably both. We have been studio mates for 8 years. We call each other artners. She came up with that. We're like art partners. We used to have a business together called Moon Gallery and Studio that went online for a while during the pandemic. And then now we just have another nice little studio space together here in Austin. All right, so I'm just gradually blending out those dark and light values at the corners of the mouth there. And then, yeah, we can notice those smile lines. Yeah, Lauren also has, I think this is so beautiful how certain people's lips are shaped this way. How some top lips have more of like it's more spread out right there. I kind of drew it a little darker than it needs to be, but that shape. It definitely can be tricky to get that the way you want it there. All right. And then, yeah, we could draw this super dark, but then that would just emphasize and draw attention to some, like we want it there. We don't want to take it off. We don't want to edit it off. Just like the lines in between the teeth, we're not, well, we are leaving those off, but we're suggesting them. So we're suggesting these smile lines and these creases, but not emphasizing them. Because there are certain things that we do want to emphasize. And then there, like this dimple, like we definitely want to get the dimple in there, and then maybe the other line for the other dimple, and see how that starts to give that personality and the expression to the face. So that's why we don't want to edit that stuff out. But if we make it too dark, then it just draws attention over there, just like making these lines too dark draw attention in a way that is not what we want when we're drawing teeth. Okay. What a class. We've got 3 minutes left here, and I would love to see how y'all's drawings turned out. So if you want to hold up your teeth drawings, we can spotlight you. All right, this is Autumn. Okay, yeah. It looks like maybe you're drawing from a different photo on that bottom one. I realized we can't see any of the bottom teeth in these pictures, but yeah, if you can see the bottom teeth, then doing the space in between the top of the bottom teeth would be good. Yeah, the top one of Jack is great. That one's I can really see his expression there. Beautiful. Thank you, Autumn. Oh, Arthur, nice to see you. Yes, that's wonderful, Arthur. Yeah, I love how nice and light and gradual that value is. And oh, and you even really captured Lauren's personality to her smile as well. Really lovely. Thank you. Right. Very nice. Yeah. Just do those shadows around the teeth. Exactly. Thank you for sharing. Ah, is that it? Nobody else? Oh, here we go. We got
Here we
Patty. Oh, I might spotlight some people before you, Rich.
No, go for it. I found a few more in here.
Oh, okay. Here we go. Yeah, Patty, that's beautiful. Oh, and then you drew somebody else. Oh, wow. Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's so convincing. Yes. See, okay, I'm so glad that you went for it with the nose and the all the rest of it because that if we had had more time, I would have loved to really got into the rest of the face and show how, when we do the whole face like that, you really don't notice that what you left out on the teeth, right? This isn't your first rodeo though, Patty. You know what you're doing. That's amazing. I'm so impressed. And this is Deb. Oh, yes, Deb. Yes. Oh, and you got me in there too. I'm glad you were able to do all three of them. Yeah, that is wonderful. All right, and Sandra, yeah, oh, I love that soft value on Jack's bottom lip. Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. We can draw the focus to these other areas so people don't even notice that we left out those spaces in between the teeth. That's really nice. Oh, yeah, your background is blurred, so you gotta turn that off or else it won't show up. But thank you. What I saw when you had it in front of your face for a second there, it looked pretty good. Can you try that one more time? Oh, here we go. Okay, let's see. All right. Wow. Yeah, that value is so soft. Beautiful. Yeah, that totally comes across the way we want it to. Just keep that value nice and soft. And yeah, I love how you did Jack's as well. That's just so, so nice and light. The zoom's working against you, but I can tell you got it nice and light. All right, and this is Jennifer. Yeah, just keep that value nice and soft and light, and we'll see the optical illusion of teeth. Okay, y'all. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. That was really fun, and I'll be back in 2 weeks for I think the next one up is the drawing hair class, and I'm really looking forward to that. And there's lots of dark value on the hair that we're drawing, so it should be a little easier to make it show up. And I've got 4 steps that we're gonna put together to be able to make the hair happen. So hopefully I'll see y'all back for that class. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful night. Thank you, Rich. Good night.